Have you ever done something bad for you that you know you need to quit, but you just can't seem to stop? Today we're going to be talking about addictions and how to overcome them.
Today's handshake, appropriate to the theme of this episode, is temperance. Temperance is the virtue that moderates our desire for pleasure. So a temperate man is not somebody who hates pleasure or desires it less, but it's somebody who loves wisdom and knowledge. He chooses the things of the future, the things of our next life with Christ, over fleeting passions and desires now. So work hard as a man to be temperate, to work on your passions and your desires that happen in the here and now while focusing our hearts and minds on that which is to come.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast. We're glad you've joined us. If you are listening for the first time, we encourage you to click subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Or if you're watching on YouTube, also click the subscribe button and hit the bell notification as well so that you can be notified when we release new content. And also, if you've enjoyed these podcasts or benefited from them in any way, we encourage you to consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/CatholicGentleman. As always, there's some great tiers for you and different levels to meet your financial situation. We really appreciate your support. It helps us continue to produce high-quality content like this.
Awesome. And we also want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Exodus 90. We'll talk about Exodus 90 a little bit later in the episode. So, Sam, we're talking about addiction today. Why is this so important for men now more than ever?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's several reasons. First of all, because addictions can enslave us. And who wants to be a slave? I mean, we should want to be free men, free to love God and serve our neighbor. And we can't do that if we're constantly addicted to different things. And I think this is something that we're vulnerable to more than we may realize. Addiction can be a big, scary word, but I think that it's a lot more common than people think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that it's something that I've struggled with, right? Mm-hmm. I know that there are certain addictive tendencies that I have in my life, right? And whether that addiction is from something, a temptation of the flesh, right? Something that I just desire or enjoy, or even a temptation of the world, right? Where you're addicted to climbing the ladder of success. And I know that that's something that I've struggled with actually a lot. And it has given me anxiety, it's given me panic attacks, and it's something that I've had to work and likely will work, throughout the rest of my life to temper or to overcome and be more open to God's will for my life. I know that it's been so frequently in opposition to His will, and we also know that addiction is on the rise, right?
Yes.
That because of this, and I will say it probably in this episode and many other ones, because of this horrific amount of overabundance that we have in life now, this attempted frictionless pathway between ourselves as consumers and that which we can consume, addictions become, I would say easier to adopt and to enslave us, today.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a hole in our hearts, so to speak. The Saint Augustine says so famously, right? Our hearts are restless until they rest in God, and so we try to fill that void with so many things. And I think if you look around at our culture, even though we're swimming in abundance, people are still unhappy. Nothing can fill that void. No amount of purchases or things like that can fill that void. And so we get addicted to a little high of getting something new. And then as soon as we have it, we forget about it and we want the next thing. But before we go any further, let's define what we're talking about when we talk about addiction, because again, addiction is a big, scary word, and a lot of times people are like, "I'm not an addict. What are you talking about?" I think it's important to define what we mean. So, first of all, I want to clarify. I think there's a big A addictions and little A addictions.
Yeah.
There's big A addictions are what I consider like clinically diagnosed addictions, like alcohol use disorder or some of these other substance abuse disorders that you might find in, the diagnostics and statistic manual that psychiatrists and counselors and psychologists use to diagnose mental disorders. Okay, so that means like big A addiction. There's criteria that you have to meet to satisfy that definition. There's time frames that they use to assess those kinds of addictions. Those can be very serious, life-altering addictions that can destroy your life in very profound ways. But there's also small A addictions that can also erode us in a smaller and more subtle way, and I call these small A addictions.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Addiction and Grace, but and in the book the author kind of makes the assertion that to some extent we're all addicts. We all turn to things other than God to kind of sate that hole in our heart, to soothe that ache that we have, that only God can satisfy ultimately. But to give a concrete definition of addiction, small A or big A, is a unhealthy relationship with any mood-altering, this key word here, behavior or substance that you persist in using despite the negative consequences.
Yeah.
And the words mood-altering are very important, because how many things can alter a mood? Millions of things.
Yeah.
A hug can alter our mood, for crying out loud.
Sure.
Like a cup of coffee can alter your mood in the morning. So anything that can potentially alter your mood in a positive direction has the potential to become addictive.
Yes.
Now, being addicted to coffee may not destroy your life, but it can still have negative consequences.
Agreed.
And you may know, maybe I should cut back, but you can't seem to.
Yes.
So that's kind of where you start to enter the territory of compulsive or addictive behaviors, when it's having a negative impact on your life. Maybe you can't sleep, maybe it's increasing your anxiety, but you just can't give up coffee.
Yeah.
That kind of thing is where you start to enter the territory of addiction, even if you're not clinically diagnosed.
Oh, and I appreciate you saying that, right? Because there's certain habits that we develop that might not quite fit into the realm of addiction. Like, so for instance, a habit could be that every morning I wake up and I like to drink orange juice. Or I like to drink, cranberry juice, and I wouldn't be able to. It's just a habit that I formed, right? And we wouldn't say a person who drinks 5 cranberry juices a week are necessarily overly addicted. It's a habit, and so I think it's good to define that. And it's also, you brought something up. You said substance or behavior. And I think this is really good. And I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on substance, because when I think of addiction, right, it's real easy to just state everything from alcohol, cigarette smoking, pornography, but there's also the addictions to our devices. There's addictions to our need for affirmation. There's addictions for our need for growing in a career path or something along those lines. And so if you want to talk a little bit more, I'd like to talk about that break between behavior and substance. I think substance really easy for us to define addictions, but then you get these behavioral addictions, and I've heard the studies that pornography is in fact not an addiction, right? There's not really sex addictions and things like that. And you hear that because it's not a substance that we're, directly consuming through our mouths or something along those lines. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah. So this is something that I get kind of riled up about, because there's a lot of researchers and clinicians that are sticking their head in the sand about behavioral addiction.
Yeah.
But fortunately, the research is finally catching up, and we're realizing that behavioral addiction is just as real as substance use addictions. So the reason they've been in denial is because substance use addictions very clearly have a neurochemical effect. They create, like little hooks in your mind that keep you craving this substance. So, for
Yeah.
example, alcohol has a very clear effect on your brain at a physiological level.
Yes.
And people say, well, okay, so that's a real addiction. But, gambling, sex addiction, things like that, those aren't real because there's no chemical effect, right?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the research is starting, they've done brain scans on people who are addicted to pornography or who are addicted to gambling or who have these other behavioral addictions. And they've started to notice, much to their embarrassment, that these behavioral addictions have the same effect in many, many cases as substance use addictions on the brain. The same areas of the brain get activated, the same neurochemicals are released, the exact same cocktail of chemical reactions in the brain and neurological and physiological reactions that happen with when you take cocaine often happen with behavioral addictions like looking at pornography or masturbating or things like that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like blowing a lot of people's minds, but they've created this new kind of category where there's substance use addictions, but there's also process addictions.
Okay.
And that's kind of the label that they've placed on behavioral addictions. They call them process addictions, where you're addicted to a ritual or a behavior that produces a, again, mood-altering effect of varying degrees. And so they've started to wake up and realize that that behavioral addictions can have the same effect as a substance use addiction, which I think is really important.
I do.
Because people have been destroyed by, I'm not joking, shopping addiction.
Yeah.
Like people have racked up their credit cards, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, completely bankrupt, and they still can't stop shopping.
Yeah.
There's people who've been destroyed by gambling addictions, unquestionably. There's people who've been destroyed by, pornography addiction and been arrested and thrown in prison. It's very clear that behavioral addictions can be just as real as substance use addictions. So I expect the next example or the next edition of the DSM, which is what psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors use to diagnose mental disorders. I fully expect the DSM-6 to have behavioral addictions in there because people are starting to finally wake up and realize that this is just as real.
I find this so, I would say, interesting and in a degree affirming what the church has always taught, right?
Yes, yeah.
And it's so great to see modern science basically just affirming the 2,000 years teachings of the church,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And I use a sex as an example, right? This the behavioral addiction, pornography and masturbation and things like that, right? Where we're addicted, men can easily get addicted to that high that we experience, right? That dopamine high is what it is, but the church has always stated that is wrong and that is sinful. While the conjugal act, right, within marriage love and marital love is approved and for the good of the human person, but what science is able to teach us is that, like in pornography and masturbation, you have this huge dopamine hit, but you don't have the oxytocin and the serotonin and those different levels like you do within marital love.
Yes.
And it's so, like I said, it's affirming because the church has always upheld faith and reason, and reason, or science in this case, is finally catching up.
Yeah.
Exactly to what the church is teaching, what it has been teaching. And I think that's so wonderful, and it's something for us as men to be entirely aware of. And I mentioned it, and I want to talk about it because my wife and I have been interested in discerning this idea of this dopamine, hit, right? And it's becoming more and more understanding. And I remember Dr. Peter Klapanis talking about it. I've heard Dr. Palencius was a family practice doctor who also is NAPRO and understood talking about, the negative effects of pornography and masturbation. And then we hear these new studies of men who are struggling or having erectile dysfunction at the age of 30, and it's because of their pornography addictions, because it all links back to this dopamine, right? That we can get these highs, and when when that dopamine high no longer gives us the same high, we have to go and we have to do more, and
Behavior escalates, yeah.
behavior escalates, and it becomes more and more of an addictive substance, and it's like that. Also, with regular substance, any alcoholic can attest to the fact that it started with 2 or 3, and then it was a 5th, a day, and it just escalated from there. A sugar addiction, right? Where one Coca-Cola didn't quite do it for me, so now I have 3 Coca. Oh no, I'm going to have Diet Coke because that's less addictive. No, it's not. and but the same thing with behavior. Again, tied to this dopamine that we are all privy to, right? It's a part of all of our biological makeup, and Satan has known that forever, and he has absolutely used that to draw us down. So I know I've mentioned sin here. I don't necessarily know if you would like to talk more on that. I know it's something in our discussions that we have, is where culpability lies when it comes into addiction.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I obviously not to dodge the question, but it is different for everybody. Some people are very well aware of what they're doing and they just don't care.
Yeah.
There's other people though who, let's say, let's take pornography addiction as an example. Let's say they were at their friend's house for a sleepover at 8 years old. They weren't prepared for this, but their friend showed them, like, hey, look at this. Here's some pornography. And an 8-year-old's developing brain is not prepared to process what you experience in pornography. And it can be very addictive, right? So maybe by the time that 8-year-old is 12, he's been looking at porn for 4 years.
Yeah.
By the time he's 22, it's been 14 years of looking at pornography. That completely changes the structure of your brain. We know that, the neuroplasticity is a thing, that the brain conforms to repeated behaviors. It changes its whole shape and structure based on repeated behaviors. So 14 years, by the time you're in college, you've been looking at pornography for that long, your brain, the whole structure of your brain has changed at that point.
Yeah.
Now, let's say that 22-year-old gets married, and he loves his wife. He doesn't want to be looking at pornography. He wants to be pure for his new bride, but he's got 14 years of addictive behavior behind him. His whole structure of his brain has changed, and he finds he just keeps falling. He just keeps going back. Yeah. Maybe he has a bad day at work. Well, he learned to self-soothe bad feelings as a 10-year-old with pornography.
Yeah.
So what's he going to do? Like, just in an automatic, like robotic, almost compulsive way, he's just going to go back and look at pornography. Then afterwards, he's going to be flooded with guilt and shame and say, never again, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to be this person. But then give it a few days or a few weeks, he's going to be right back, because the whole response of trigger and ritualization that can be so embedded in our brains can mitigate that culpability to an extent where you literally can't control yourself any longer. And that's where you need to seek help. You need to get help at that point if that's the state that you're in. But the point being, you're not always fully in control of yourself when we're talking about a large A, like clinical style addiction. You can't always control it. So in those places, yes, I don't think you're fully morally culpable. However, the addiction can still cause a lot of damage in your marriage or in other areas of your life. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because we see it frequently on our private men's group, and individuals coming with this overwhelming amount of shame, and then you get also individuals who are trying to coach them, and there's this real sense of, yes, you should be ashamed, you are committing mortal sin over and over and over again, and that just helps. It does not help this person heal, right? Because of the level of bondage and addiction. And again, it's not to dodge the question or state that these things aren't incredibly important and you shouldn't be going to confession. You absolutely should, right? be going to confession for these things, and you should be praying for them. But you also need to seek help, and you also need, in many cases, again, even with behavioral addictions, not just substance addictions, there are some guiding principles that we should be aware of to help us as men overcome these large A addictions, or even small A addictions,
Yes, yeah.
right? Because the point of this episode wasn't to go straight to large A addictions and be mental health counselors having a conversation
Right.
on the broad level, but it is just to talk about addictions, these temptations of the world and temptations of the flesh, right? As Catholic men, we understand there are three temptations. There's the world, the flesh, and Satan. And when we are held in bondage to that of the flesh and the world because of our upbringing, because you said 8 years old, and I know I've read studies that that's the modern age of exposure now for young boys, is 8-year-olds. How horrible, how horrific. We need to pray and fast for individuals that have been forced and abused into this situation at such a young age.
Yes.
And we need to see them with a degree of compassion and with love. But again, there are some guiding principles that we can have for all addictions, because I know myself, in my consumerist mindset, I can certainly fall into addictions. I also know I have addictive tendencies that I'm aware of, and that's why my ascetical practices or my practices of abstinence for X, Y, and Z throughout the whole year, right? Not as Father David Abernathy stated. It's not episodic. It's not just I remove myself from these addictions during Lent,
Right.
and then I give myself, or I allow them free reign, or I try and moderate them throughout the year. No, it's something that we do continuously.
Yes.
And I have to do that for myself because of these addictive tendencies that I know that I possess within me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is an important point about certain personalities do tend towards addiction more than others. And based on your life experiences, I mean, somebody who had a very stressful, traumatic childhood is going to be much more prone to addictions than someone else. But what I want to emphasize too is I don't want to, like you said, go all in on like big A addictions.
Yeah.
Because, again, the key word here is mood altering, right?
Thank you.
What can that be? That could be gaming. That could be your cell phone. That could be food. That could be shopping. That could be I'm even going to go so far as to say going to confession. Can be part of a ritual, so to speak, that is part of an addiction. So, for example, I look at pornography. I go to a confession. That's part of the whole ritual of looking at pornography. Is it really leading to my healing? No, it's not. And so addiction can be any number of things. But why do we want our mood altered?
Yeah.
Like, what's so bad about life that we can't handle life? Well, it really is a fear of suffering in any form. When we think of suffering, we're like, picture someone on their deathbed, it's racked with pain or something. No, suffering can be as simple as boredom.
Yes.
I'm bored. Stimulate me.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just grab my phone. I'll get out and play a video game. Like, suffering can come in many forms, including boredom or depression at work. Oh man, the boss overlooked me again and promoted my coworker. Darn it, let me find an addiction to soothe that pain. Or I just had an argument with my wife and I feel alienated from her, and that's not a good feeling. Let me find an addiction to fill the void.
Yeah.
Whether that's binge watching a Netflix show.
That's right.
It could be something very, very simple and seemingly harmless. But your point is you're turning to that to soothe some pain.
Yeah, to medicate.
Big or small. It could be a small pain, I said, boredom.
Yeah.
Just sitting in the doctor's office. Oh my goodness, I can't handle this. Listening to the clock tick, I've got to have something to kind of soothe that pain of boredom. But it can also be any number of things. Stress. So the acronym that people usually use is HAALT. Hungry, angry, anxious, lonely, tired.
Okay.
These are like universal triggers for addiction in people.
Yeah.
I'm hungry. I'm going to get a sugar rush. I'm going to go drink a soda, have a candy bar. Snickers preys on this,
That's
with
right. Not going anywhere for a while, grab a Snickers.
Exactly,
Yep.
right. Hungry, yeah. So blood sugar crashed. You turn to an addiction. Angry. Like I said, I just had an argument with my wife,
Yeah.
or I just felt like somebody did something unjust to me. I'm going to go find some addictive behavior or substance to make me feel better for a few minutes. Anxious. Guys get anxious. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to show it, but we get anxious,
Yeah.
I need something to make me feel safe, whether that's shopping or that's, again, turning to your phone or, going somewhere. It's part of your ritual, going to the bar to hang out with your friends. Maybe texting a coworker that you maybe shouldn't be texting, but it makes you feel good when she flatters you or whatever.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Lonely. That's another one that kind of goes along with anxiety, but this can get us into trouble. You feel alienated from your wife. You feel like you don't have connection with her. Or maybe you're single. You don't have a wife and you're lonely and you long for that intimacy or something. Again, perfect trigger for some addictive, mood-altering behavior or substance that can make you forget about your pain for a minute. And then tired. When we're tired, our reserves of self-control get weak, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to be in control of yourself when you feel energetic and you feel confident and you feel on top of the world. But when you're tired and you just want to rest, all those reserves of strength just kind of collapse, and then you're vulnerable to addictive behavior. So those are the big triggers that a lot of people succumb to.
No, and I appreciate that very much. And there's two things. And the first thing that I think is really important for our listeners and for ourselves is to look at your day in and day out and say, what am I declaring kind of like a rule of my life? And is it that I drink a glass of scotch once the kids go to bed? Or is it that I have to watch X amount of TV in the evening, and if I stay up a little bit later to finish the next episode, that's okay. That's part of my life, but I've got to give myself this time, right? And maybe you don't even have that awareness that you're doing that. Maybe it's just a habit that you've formed, right? These sort of things can be these pleasure seekings, these self-seeking habits can be addictions and can be little a addictions and I think that it's important for each man to just take a pause and reflect on his day, because as we talked about in the Handshake, right, a temperate man doesn't hate pleasure or dislike it any less, but he understands that he loves wisdom, prudent use of his time, and his ultimate goal of salvation more. And that's where we take that balance, that's where we move towards. But you said something right at the beginning of your time there where you mentioned suffering, right? And our inability to suffer well. And I think that is so great, right? Because saints we have that prayed for increase of suffering, right? Saints that understood that really, when I look at the cross of Christ, his wounds call out to me, and he is the way, and that we must accept our crosses, our little sufferings daily. But as men today, we struggle. We have an inability to suffer, period, not even suffer well, right? And I know I've talked in previous episodes that maybe suffering, it's not suffering with joy just yet, some sort of gift of the Holy Spirit, but it's suffering peacefully. It's suffering with an understanding and awareness that these are coming to you for your ultimate reward, for your salvation. And so we can practice suffering by the mortifications we put upon ourselves, right? So we can take on certain mortifications and certain ascetical practices. Of course, there's fasting for many different reasons, not the least of which is, in reparation for your sins or for control of your desires and your pleasures, but also for union with Christ and for a deeper communication and time spent with Him who we love and adore and need to love more and more because He loves us unconditionally. But there's also the small mortifications that we can do upon ourselves, like not having the AC when you're driving to work blowing on you at this nice cool thing, right? Maybe you even turn it off in the summer, as long as you're not going to stink, at work and stuff. But there could be the small little sufferings as, the pebble in your shoe. Or maybe you really hate tags in your shirt, but you're going to leave it on knowing that that small minor irritation gives you that opportunity to place something in a controlled environment that can help you learn to suffer and control these passions and these desires of ours, so that when these pleasures that truly are, pleasures of the world and of the flesh, kind of allure us and call us in and connect with us on a much deeper level, we are more in control of those passions and of that pleasure-seeking desires. And so I really liked that you mentioned that, and I don't think we even discussed that in our prep for this, is that kind of that inability to suffer well. But I think that's such a good point that you hit on there.
Yeah, and the goal is freedom. We want to be free men. We don't want to be slaves. St. Paul talks about this, and he talks about disciplining his body so that he can be a free man. Like, you don't want to be your passions and lusts to be kind of controlling and ruling you. You want to be free. Yeah. Not free from, but free for. The purpose is to be free, to love God and to serve. The great men of history, we think about the great saints, and not even the saints, but just great men in general, who contributed to the world and contributed to society and built the world up and raised others up around them. They were men, 9 times out of 10, they were free men. They were free from their passions and lusts, and were thus able to contribute to others and to contribute to the building up of the church and to evangelization and to all of these things. So being free is so important.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, I do want to emphasize too that what you said is so important. Pleasure, comfort can be the ultimate addiction. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe you're not a cigarette smoker, maybe you're not a alcoholic or any of those things, but you just love comfort and you avoid anything that disrupts or disturbs your comfort. Okay, well, that's kind of the ultimate addiction. Your comfort is the premium that you seek above all else. So again, it can take many forms, but there's some things that we can do to kind of fight back against these addictive tendencies. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, agreed. And before we talk about that, you mentioned free for and freedom, and it's one of many different things. And we do have a show sponsor, which is Exodus 90, and I think it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about Exodus 90. Talk about it. We'd like to thank the sponsor of this episode, Exodus 90. If you don't know who Exodus 90 is, we strongly encourage you to check them out. They are a ministry for men that provide a roadmap for spiritual and actually physical growth.
Exodus 90 is all about asceticism, prayer, and brotherhood. Now, those 3 pillars really form the basis of the program, but it's 90 days of spiritual exercises, readings, getting together with your brothers in your fraternity that you choose. And it's difficult. I'm not going to lie. I've done it a few times, and it can be hard. It can be demanding, but we need a little bit of asceticism in our lives today. The church doesn't ask very much of us these days, and that's okay. But sometimes we need a little bit of an extra spiritual shot in the arm, and that's what Exodus 90 can provide.
So there's a science behind why Exodus 90 is developed the way it is, right? Those 90 days have a purpose. But another great thing about Exodus 90 is that they also offer different variations. They offer a Lenten program, they offer different challenges over the summer. So basically, they have something that's there to fit your needs. Again, asceticism, prayer, fraternity, and really that roadmap that men find so helpful. I know that I did when I went through it. So we strongly encourage you to check them out at exodus90.com/CatholicGentleman or click on that link in the show notes. So you mentioned free for, and I know that is something that I forget so frequently when I am trying to better a condition in my life, when I am trying to put in a new positive virtue, right? A habit forming virtue, something that is moving me in a positive direction, making me a better man. And that is what am I moving towards, right? Not what am I leaving? Because so frequently I fall into this, but I don't really know what I'm going for, and I know that I enjoyed this, and was it really that bad on my, on my life? Not really. I mean, sure, when I'm, 50 years old or 60 years old, I don't want to have to, watch TV this, and I don't want to drink 3 cups of coffee in the morning, but that's in the future, and right now it's actually helping me, right? And just that cycle of justification that we fall into. But if we can understand what we're moving towards, right, that can be such an eye-opening. And I encourage people, and I've done it myself, is to actually write on a Post-it note and put it on your computer screen. Take out an Expo marker and write on your mirror. Take out a piece of paper and tape it on your dresser, on your underwear drawer or something, a drawer that you know that you're going to have to access daily. With what am I moving towards? Right?
Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing it? Exactly right. And that can be such an amazing and helpful reminder, and so necessary, and remembering the ultimate reward that awaits when you have overcome said addiction. So.
Yeah. There's that business guru, Simon Sinek, who has that great TED Talk about identifying your why. Like, why do I do this? And that's one of the things I love about Exodus 90 that we just kind of talked about, is that that's one of the first things that they have you do is identify your why. Why am I doing this? What is the meaning behind this? What am I doing this for? And the reason being is when things get hard, you're going to need to remind yourself why you're doing something, why you're making sacrifices, or why you're kind of pushing through those addictions to the freedom on the other side. So it's very important.
Yeah, agreed. So you as a professional, mental health professional, you have a lot of great knowledge and understanding of how to help people through these addictions. A lot of them are, again, affirmed and built within the church. Like, for instance, the power of mercy and forgiveness, right? These divine gifts that are given to us, where basically we don't come to confession once and assume that we will never have to return to confession, right? Well, I made a firm purpose of amendment. I no longer have sin, right? This is no longer my addiction. That's not the case at all. Is that we have to return to that font of mercy and forgiveness, like frequently, sometimes weekly, definitely monthly, as our growth and holiness really requires. But so many groups outside of the church, and I see it all the time, they pay a certain lip service to forgiveness, right? Is that once saved, always saved, if you sinned, God forgives you, just, close your eyes. But if you do that repetitively, as addictions will have it, it's always falling and stuff like that. These groups see you as kind of a bad PR, for them, bad publicity. And so maybe you were never saved. Maybe you really never believed in Christ, right? And we see this so often in our affluent society. Or we see the other extreme of that, which is, there's no such thing as original sin. There's no such thing as sin, that some people just, have these habitual attachments that, help them get through lives, and we should be okay with that. And, don't let your, belief system impede me from doing what I want to do when I want to do it. Right. And so, but anyways, for those of us who have accepted that addiction is a reality and that sin is a reality, and we want to move towards, what are some of the things that we can do to help us overcome them? Like, what are some of the steps that we can take to do that?
Yeah, I think, that's the first one I want to highlight is being radically honest about the reality of your situation.
Yeah.
If you're in denial, you're never going to make progress. Mm-hmm. So if you say, well, it's just a bad habit, or I've got control of this, I can stop anytime I want, whatever, then you're never going to make progress. You're never going to be free. This is why, in the 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous that are so popular, one of the first things they have you do is be completely honest about your situation. Mm-hmm. You have to admit your powerlessness. You have to say, this addiction has got me. I don't have it. I'm not in control of it. It's in control of me. And until you say that fully and radically and honestly, you're never going to be free.
Yeah.
But it's a scary thing to, stand up in a meeting and say, hi, I'm Bob and I'm an addict.
Yeah.
Like, that's a scary thing. And a lot of people fear doing that so much that they would rather remain in denial and say, I don't really have a problem. I've got this under control. I can stop anytime I want. So, I think being radically honest about your situation is a big first step.
Yeah, it's so necessary. Yeah, I agree.
And then the second one I would say is, once you've acknowledged that step, get some help. Okay, and that doesn't mean professional help, although some people really do benefit from that.
Agreed.
In fact, many, many people can benefit from professional help. So that could be counseling, that could be a support group, that could be any number of things. But one of the most powerful things you can do to overcome an addiction is seek healthy human connection. Addiction thrives on isolation. Because, and it's a vicious cycle, because when you're addicted to something, like let's just, again, it's the common example that we've been using, but let's say you're addicted to pornography.
Yeah.
A lot of people are really embarrassed about that. They feel a lot of shame and guilt after they fall. The last thing they want to do is tell somebody about that problem. However, the minute that you do, you will break this cycle. But if you stay isolated, you'll be bearing all that shame alone.
Yeah.
And then the shame will drive you back, because shame is one of the worst feelings we can have. And we want to, alter our mood, right? We want to feel better.
Yeah.
So then we go back to pornography or whatever your addiction of choice is. It makes you feel better for a minute, and then you followed by the shame crash. So you gotta break the shame cycle. The only way to do that is to get help. So find a good friend, a trusted friend, a mentor, a spiritual director, somebody you trust, who can be your accountability partner, so to speak, who can neutralize that shame cycle. And accountability, unfortunately, a lot of people have this mindset about it that it's very punitive.
Yeah.
Oh, you fell again, here's 50 lashes. No. It's actually the exact opposite. It's for the first time feeling safe.
Yeah.
It's actually fear that drives addiction. It's connection and acceptance and love that breaks the cycle of addiction. And that's what accountability can do, is say, you fell again, let me give you a hug. I love you, brother. And that kind of thing is what can neutralize or weaken the power of shame, which is shame is the fuel of addiction.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And so we're talking about the fullness of the human person, right? When we're talking about overcoming addictions, it's not just you can do it yourself. We are created to be a communion of persons, right? To be in union with each other. No man is an island. We are all called to that interconnectivity. Even monks in monasteries are praying for the people of the world and giving us that example of prayer, but they are connected to us through that power of their intentionality and their prayer. And so we already talked about what we're moving towards, and that's really important, because we're talking about emotions here, we're talking about the intellect, we're talking about the physical person. But one thing that I think is incredibly important, and this would be maybe the next step, is shutting off access to it, right?
Yes.
Because as men, how easy is it for us to believe that we are strong enough? Once we've done those first couple things, like, I'm strong enough to say no. I don't have to put that software on my computer for the sake of pornography, or I don't have to get rid of all of that alcohol, or I don't actually have to remove my computer or my TV from, I was thinking TV from the wall and put it in a closet or something like that, right? If your addiction is to binge watch things in the evening, right? These are all really, really important and necessary steps for us to humbly admit our feelings, because what happens is, if you do not shut off that access, that temptation, that dopamine reminder that we are so desperately connected to will overcome our willpower, right? And then we will fall again. So one way to help avoid that fall, avoid that near occasion of a fall, is to shut off access, correct?
Yeah, and that's such a key point. Our Lord said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you or causes you to sin, cut it off.
Yeah.
Why did he focus on the eye and the hand? The eye is, again, connected to desire. It's what fuels the desire for things. Now, again, that doesn't have to be, sexual in nature. That could be something, gambling. You just drive by that casino and you just got to go in there. Or you drive by that liquor store and your eye is drawn to the bottles on the shelf or whatever. There's a power of sight and desire are intimately related.
Yes.
And so Christ is saying, remove yourself from those visual temptations. Whatever your addiction happens to be, you have to remove it from your sight.
That's right.
Second, the hand is what we reach out and grab with, right? That's how we obtain things. That's how we grasp. So once the desire is formulated, then we act, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying, break that cycle. You have to take radical steps. Plucking out your eye, cutting off your hand, those are pretty radical steps.
Yeah.
Now, of course, he wasn't speaking literally, but he's saying, do whatever it takes and know yourself well enough to know what your weaknesses are, what your triggers are, and then cut them off.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is so key. For example, this is an example I hear, like, a lot of times, like, well, I'm addicted to my phone. I know it's hurting my relationship with my wife. I know that I shouldn't be on there so much. I'm not paying attention to my kids. Maybe I'm distracted at work. Well, why don't you get rid of your smartphone? I can't. Oh, I need it for this. I need it for that. I'll get lost without the GPS and the calendar and the email app. And I just got to have my smartphone.
Right.
And you're just like, really? You absolutely need it. You can't live without your smartphone. That's telling me, that there's a deeper problem there, an unwillingness to change or to take the steps that you need to take. So if you're serious about an addiction, like our Lord said, cut it off. Like, you've got to take radical action. And it's, I'm not a big Tony Robbins fan, but he did say something once that kind of made me smile. And that was what he's like, if you want change in your life, you want big change.
Yeah.
Then you have to take big action. You have to take, the word he used, massive action.
Right.
And it just kind of makes me smile. But the point is, you can't expect big changes with small actions. Like, at some point, you have to take big steps to see big changes. So I think that's a really key point.
I agree, and I appreciate that those details there, because it is, and I know within our own connection to pride and our own machismo, and really what culture has kind of put up as an image of man. We don't want to admit these things, and we don't want to accept not only our failure in these matters, but our inability to control the situation. So we do have to cut those off. We have to admit those humbly. And what a great growth and holiness that can be, and what a purifying experience, right? Because it's not our will that'll be done; it's His will, and so we can work towards that. So a final thing that we discussed is, if you were used to doing something so frequently, even drinking 5 Cokes a day or something along those lines, what do we do instead? Like, what do we have to do to fit that? Do we feel like just having an accountability partner, picking ourselves up by our own bootstraps and handling it and cutting off access to Coke is enough, or remembering psychologically what we're moving towards? No, there's something else that can happen in that time duration each day, and that's what we're going to replace it with, right?
Yes, yeah. And replacement activities are really key. So whenever you quit one thing, your brain is going to be like in shock. Like, you mean I can't turn to this anymore? Like, you're just going to be, so if you don't replace that activity with something else, you're just going to go back to that activity. So, for example, like, let's say you're addicted to gaming. Well, if all of a sudden you've been gaming 8 hours a day and all of a sudden you just stop cold turkey, your brain's not going to know what to do with itself. Right. You're going to have to find something else to do. So you're going to have to find a hobby. You're going to have to, go ride your bike, go running, take a walk. Often physical activity has a mood-altering effect.
Yeah.
Endorphins are released when we physically exercise and things like that. So that can be a great way. Exercise could be a great replacement activity for addictive behaviors. Or read a book, or find a new hobby, or reach out to a friend. There's any number of things that you can do that can replace those addictive behaviors.
Yeah.
And I guess just in conclusion, I want to emphasize, though, that once again, addiction is driven by pain, the pain of shame, the pain of isolation, the pain of perhaps past traumas or hurts.
Yeah.
And there's a saying, not why the addiction, but why the pain. And I would say if you're really serious about breaking your addiction cycles in your life, big or small, big A or little a, look for the pain at the root of it. Mm-hmm. Whether that's just an inability to suffer, I just can't be bored, you have to be stimulated all the time. Okay, that's more just like a vice that you need to work on, you know? But if it's something bigger, like let's say you had an abusive childhood, or maybe you were in a severe car accident and you have flashbacks, and that's extremely painful and terrifying. Yeah. Or any number of different things. These pains in our life, emotional as well as physical, can often be at the root of addictions. So give yourself a little grace and say, why am I doing this? Chances are, 9 times out of 10, it's not random.
Yeah, agreed.
Look for the pain that's driving it, and then offer that to God. And then seek healing in the best way possible, whether that's spiritual healing through some sort of retreat, or through, spiritual direction, or if it's an emotional wound, go seek counseling, seek professional help. We're all human, we're all fallen. Even men have emotions. Newsflash,
Exactly.
So if there's hurt there, deal with it. Amen. You have a responsibility to deal with it. There's an old saying: what we don't transform, we transmit.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So when that pain is not transformed, you're just going to pass that addiction cycle on to the next generation.
To someone else. And so I appreciate that a lot. And kind of in conclusion, for me, as individuals listening to this episode, hopefully you've been able to pick up that Sam and I aren't Pelagian in any aspect, right? We're not, you can do it yourself, right? You need others, and more importantly, you need God's grace, and you need to respond to God's grace. And it is there in abundance, right? In an overabundance, right? We talked about earlier that we live in this horrific amount of overabundance. Well, God's grace is there in an adequate form, and even more so in abundance. And so, we turn to that through confession, the Eucharist, and of course, our daily practices and daily devotions. If this is your first time, we do these nightcaps and manly things that we appreciate, that honestly call us to God's goodness and His creation. And so, if you've listened to some other episodes, Sam really likes watches. He's getting me into watches, and he's got a really cool one here. So today's nightcap is an automatic watch. An automatic watch, there's usually 3 different kinds of movements in a watch that drives the hands. There's a quartz movement, which is battery powered and really just like electronic. Then there's a hand wound movement where you have to wind it every day to keep it ticking. And then there's an automatic movement which winds itself as your body moves. There's little weights and gears in there that spin and drive the self-winding movement as you move your body. So these are really cool. They don't have to be expensive. Yeah. Seiko is a watch company that has some really cheap self-winding automatic watches. For like $80 or something. So if you've never had one, they're really miracles of engineering and human ingenuity. Just kind of the craftsmanship that goes into that. It's very cool. Yeah, agreed. And we're very big on that authenticity. And what's more authentic than a watch that is so masterfully crafted that it winds itself through your movement? I mean, that's so incredible and exciting. So
as we end every episode,
be a man, be a saint.